Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Grayson Garvin. Today's episode is my interview with Kevin Ziomek, my former Vanderbilt teammate and now Senior Managing Director of Jones Lang LaSalle in the commercial real estate space in Nashville, Tennessee. I hope you will listen to his grit, perseverance, as well as the specificity in which he describes his goals. So without further ado, let's get to it. Kevin Ziomek, welcome to the Pursuit Podcast, my friend.
Grayson, thanks for having me on. Excited to join.
I'm super excited that you're here today. First off, our friendship and being teammates goes way back, but I think that a lot of what I believe and really what orchestrated the Pursuit Podcast, I think that, again, your story really resonates with some really high highs and maybe even some really low lows, but, oftentimes it's the process of kind of the in-between that makes, both of those things feel a little bit more special. So as I was kind of getting ready for today, I was thinking back to, as being former teammates, there's a lot of stories that I could share, some probably airworthy, some maybe not so airworthy. But I was actually thinking back to a story that I was actually just telling us off air. I remember, and this speaks a little bit to some of the reasons why I admire you so much. I don't even know if I've told you this before. But you came in as a freshman. I was a junior. You were a very, highly touted prospect coming in, but maybe a little bit green, a little bit naive to, college baseball and to go into a completely different part of the country. And so I tell the story. We were at South Carolina. I think this was probably Friday night. We were warming up before the game. Neither of us were going to pitch that day. And we were throwing. And as pitchers do sometimes, a ball gets away from us. And you threw a ball and hit a fan. And
Sure did.
I turned around, and unfortunately that South Carolina Gamecock fan was less than kind to both of us. And I think that in some ways sets the stage for this conversation today because, again, you've come, so far in so many ways. And I'm really excited to kind of hear your perspective on your story, both good and bad. But as we sit here today, obviously, like I said, highly touted, high school prospect, highly touted college prospect, highly drafted, hit some valleys in there. And now obviously you've, had massive success in commercial real estate. As we sit here in 2023, how does Kevin Ziomek define success?
Yeah, it's a good question, Grayson. I think I'd see success as there's really four pillars to me when I'm looking at success. I think you can think about family success, and that can be different for everybody, right? But what does a good, loving, supportive family look like? I think that's one pillar. I think a second pillar would be health and wellness. That is something, as a former athlete, that is something that's incredibly important to me. Both my wife and I are very driven with our fitness, and we try to keep a pretty strict regimen on that aspect of our lives. Obviously, that goes into kind of your dietary and whatnot. But ultimately, that kind of sets you up for the rest of your life and being able to enjoy those moments with your family. So I think those two pieces are very key. And then I think you've got kind of the monetary aspect of success. And again, that can look very different for everybody. But I think what are the goals that you have to set yourself up, set your family up for generations financially? And for me, that's always been a goal of mine, is to set up the next generation financially. And then I think kind of the fourth pillar would be just your career. What type of goals do you have as a professional? And that could be leadership goals, mentorship goals. Are there certain promotions that you're chasing as a business person? So I think that, really all four of those pillars, to me, I'm always trying to find the perfect balance. And I think the most successful people in my mind are those that are really good at all four of those. And it's never perfect. There's always days where I'm feeling like I'm not winning on the family side, or maybe I'm not winning at work. But the days that I'm really the happiest and I feel like I'm, headed in a really good direction, or when I'm kind of doing well, proficient at all four. And I think it's always something that I'm chasing.
Yep, that's awesome. We're humans, right? So we're never going to do all of those things perfectly. It is a beautiful dance. I think, though, kind of what you're saying, especially as former athletes. It's like you talk about the pillars or goals, and what that really does is that creates a sense of purpose. And we're created for purpose, um, and without it, we kind of you know fizzle away. And I think, especially as athletes, I'm sure you would resonate with this. It's like I feel like in some ways, fizzling away is worse than losing. It's like not progressing is just not really an option. So I resonate with that very much. Take
No
me back
doubt.
to so thinking back, I want you to tell a little bit more of your story from your perspective. Specifically, like as you come into Vanderbilt as a highly touted prospect, walk me through a little bit high level from Vanderbilt to professional baseball, post professional baseball to what you're doing now, because I think that that's a really important it's a really important trajectory for people to understand. Because where you are now, um, most people can't fully appreciate, I think, all of the hard work that you put in to get to where you are today. I think it's easy to look at somebody, again, in commercial real estate and be like, oh, they're an overnight success, right? Or, oh, you're a highly touted prospect. That's an overnight success, but your path was not a linear progression. So just tell me in your words how you kind of perceive your story starting from Vanderbilt on to where you are today.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. And I mean, maybe I take a step further and just say you hit it spot on when you said I came into Vanderbilt as a green freshman. I grew up in a small town in Western Massachusetts, Amherst, Mass. My parents both were hardworking folks that started their own law firm in the small town of Amherst, and they still live there today. And I think they were an incredible example for me as to what it looks like to figure out build your own business from the ground up, and really bet on yourself. And I think growing up, there's really two key things that were always forefront for us. My parents being attorneys, they really stressed the education side of things, and I'm so glad they did. And me, I got two younger brothers. The three of us, we were always very passionate about athletics, particularly baseball. And so from a young age, I think baseball was always kind of my favorite sport. It was always something that I dreamed of being a professional and pitching in the big leagues, being an all-star. And I was fortunate to be a pretty highly touted prospect, as you mentioned, in high school. Ended up getting really serious interest out of high school from a number of teams in the MLB draft. My parents, thankfully, were incredibly supportive of all the interest I got, but they gave me the best advice I could have ever gotten. They said, you need to go to school. And I'm incredibly grateful for that forever. But I ended up making it what, looking back on, was probably one of the harder conversations I've had to have in my life. But I told MLB scouts that they could put a blank check in front of me and I was still going to go to Vanderbilt. Um, that was, as an 18-year-old, to actually have some wherewithal to be able to say that. I like to give my parents and some of my other mentors a pat on the back for getting me to that point, because that's a hard thing to do when they start throwing big checks around. And, fast forward 2010, got to Vanderbilt, went to go play for Coach Corbin, who, as you know, he's the best. He's the best in the business, incredible mentor, incredible leader to young men. And I think that's really what he prides himself is training, prides himself on is training young boys to become men. And it's much more than just baseball. It's life. And so that's what I did in my 3 years there. I felt like kind of prepared myself for not only the next chapter in baseball, but the next chapter in life, and how to be a husband and how to be a business person. And it was just an incredible experience there, no doubt. But coming into Vanderbilt, being in a small town in Amherst, I didn't really have the exposure to travel ball or these big showcase tournaments that a lot of kids have. Even nowadays, I think it's a lot more prevalent than it was. I just, I was pretty simple as far as what I did. We played 20 games in high school, and we played another 20 games in the summer for American Legion, and that was it. And, talking to some of my teammates like you, other guys from Texas and Florida and California, guys that played hundreds of games. And,
It sounds really
it's just,
nice.
yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to it. There's a reason Coach Corbin and other coaches, I think, recruit heavily in the Northeast because you do have a little bit less mileage, as they would say, on your arm and your body. You just haven't really taken the wear and tear. But, on the flip side for me, just not having got the reps that some other guys had gotten, it wasn't so much that I felt overmatched from a talent perspective. It was more just like, I need to get in there and play and get some live innings against real quality talent in the SEC. And so my freshman fall was a real wake up call for me, and was fortunate to perform pretty well and ended up getting some innings my freshman year. But it was
on a
not
really
without its.
talent on a really talented team, I might add, that year. So for you to get innings, significant innings, might I add, as a freshman, I mean, that was a big deal. Just for our listeners to get a little bit more context of Kevin's talent coming in. He was very good.
Yeah, and I had the fortune of coming in behind guys like Sonny Gray or Grayson, guys who won a whole lot of games in the SEC and had a lot of innings under their belt, and they went on to be really good professional pitchers. It was pretty cool to feel like I could learn from some really experienced talent like that. I think that kind of set me up for the next couple of years at Vanderbilt, where we had a down year in 2012, and then 2013 went on to be a really strong team, ranked number one in the country for a good bit of the year. And so, we were really talented every year that I was there. Had a lot of high draft picks, a lot of guys that came from all over the country that came to play for Coach Corbin. It was an incredible experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So walk me through now. Great experience at Vanderbilt. Again, you were a part of a College World Series team in 2011, and you were a part of, if I recall, that 2013 team. Was that the best SEC record in history?
It was.
Yeah, so
It
those are
won,
some
I
really
believe.
talented teams that you were a part of. And then going further, you were a very high second round pick of the Detroit Tigers. And walk me through a little bit of your professional baseball journey.
Yeah, like you said, Tigers picked me up in 2013. I was a junior at the time, and ended up signing a professional contract. Went off and played 4 years with the Tigers. My first full season was in West Michigan in Grand Rapids, which I would say was one of the best experiences I had in professional baseball. Outstanding place to play, beautiful in the
You had a good
summer up
year.
there. Had a good year. Had a good year. We had a really strong team, a lot of high draft picks across the board, and that pitching staff that we had that year was really fun to be around. So had a great experience in West Michigan. Was named one of the top prospects in the Tigers org after that year. So felt like I had some really good momentum going forward. My next year was a little bit more up and down. Had gone to big league camp and got in there. Didn't quite feel right. Wasn't totally sure what it was, but my arm just it felt like it wasn't really moving the way I was used to having it move. I didn't really have a whole lot of pain, but I knew something was wrong. I'll never forget Brad Osmus, who was the Tigers manager at the time, walked out. I think I was pitching the opening game of spring training, and we were playing against a college team there in Florida. And he walked out and he said, "Z, are you feeling okay?" And I said, "I think so. What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you're throwing fastballs at 81 miles an hour." And that kind of clicked right there. I was like, I knew I wasn't right. I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to tell anybody because I didn't want to get pulled off the field. But I just, it didn't feel right. And when he said that, it all kind of started to come together. So got pulled out, ended up doing a whole lot of tests, MRIs. They did some stuff on my shoulder, did some stuff on my elbow. Couldn't quite figure out what the problem was. My UCL and my elbow looked okay. The labrum looked okay. Come to find out, it was a nerve issue called thoracic outlet syndrome, which is starting to become something that's a bit more prevalent now. But it was so strange. couldn't really feel the ball. And ended up losing arm strength and ended up getting a surgery not too long after that where they removed one of my ribs. As bizarre as that sounds, they removed a rib to kind of free up the injury. And tried to come back, rehabbed it for about a year. Came back to spring training, and it just wasn't quite right. Still, even after spring training, the arm strength, it just never really came back to where I wanted it to be. Which is where I kind of got to a point, like a lot of guys do, where you say, look, had a really good run in college, really good run in professional baseball, but I think it kind of, I just knew deep down that it was time to think about the next chapter. There's a reason I went to Vanderbilt, top 20 institution, because I knew that at some day, whether it was in 3 years after pro ball or 20 years after my experience at Vanderbilt, I was probably going to want that diploma. And so it came in pretty handy. Ended up retiring in 2017, early 2017, I think it was. Came back to Nashville, had a really good network that I had built up here in town, and leaned on that network to learn about a whole lot of different industries. But commercial real estate was always the one for me. It always just kind of came back to me as where I wanted to spend my time, and was fortunate to land a gig here at JLL in Nashville for a couple of folks, both Tyler and Tom Hooper, who lead the office in Nashville, and it's been an incredible experience since I joined. I've been here about 7 years now, and so that's kind of the journey. As you mentioned, a lot of
That's
highs and a
great.
lot of lows.
That's great. Well, so many things to unpack. And, for our listeners, listening, the way that I would say pro ball works for professional baseball for, you know, really anybody, but, more so highly touted prospects is, you kind of crescendo, if you will, to this kind of opening of opportunity. And the opening of opportunity has to align with a lot of different things. Health has to be one of them. Performance is another one of those aspects. And for a lot of pitchers, Kevin and I both kind of sat in this, in this instance where as our opening of opportunity was presenting itself, the health was not. And that becomes a really hard thing when you have been accustomed to your body performing at a specific way and form for a very long period of time. And so, again, going back to that point, and then obviously you talked about, the great network that you had. Walk me through how that felt for you emotionally to get to the place where, again, you're working yourself through rehab, thoracic outlet syndrome, coming maybe to the realization that baseball may or may not be over at this point. I mean, I remember having conversations with you on the phone when we were in spring training about this very thing. But sitting here now, how did you mentally process that to be able to kind of shut the door to baseball to open it to all of the other opportunities, professionally?
It was really difficult. I mean, there's no way around it. This is something that, much like since I was 3 years old, my dream was to pitch in the big leagues, be an all-star, win a World Series, all the above. And I was very fortunate to go a whole lot farther than 99% of people. And I'm incredibly grateful for that. But, unfortunately, it just got to a point where, like you said, the health and the opportunity just didn't line up the way that I hoped. And so it took some time. I leaned on a lot of my support group, talked a lot with my family, talked a lot with my wife, who was my fiance at the time, talked to a lot of former teammates, high school teammates, coaches, guys like you who played with me at Vanderbilt. Having that support system was really an instrumental piece to making that decision. And I had a whole lot of people tell me I was crazy. And that to me was probably the hardest part. Is like you see some people on the sidelines who would have killed for the opportunity that you and I had. And I think that they would probably be the ones that would just be cheering you on forever, even if it's not necessarily in your best interest, because they see what it's like to make it. And of course, that would have been incredible. But I think I got to a point where I realized, look, my body is not right, and I don't know that it's ever going to be right. and I need to do what is best for my family. And I think that that decision ultimately ended up being to retire from baseball. And, I feel lucky in a sense that I didn't get to a point where I had a negative outlook on the game, or, I felt like I had done something wrong or the game hadn't treated me right. I think I retired on my own terms. Um, and I think there's something to be said to that because I can still flip on a baseball game. I can still go to a game and watch a buddy play or a teammate play and feel really good supporting them. And there's a lot of guys that I've played with that can't say that. They are almost so bitter that they can't even watch baseball anymore. So feel good about that.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great perspective. So flipping that back then to kind of, okay, so you shut the door and you mentioned the network that, you tapped into. I think we both feel very blessed to be in Nashville to have the network that we have. I've told people, a lot of people, this story. When I committed to Vanderbilt, I remember being on the phone with Corbs, and he's like, "Grayson, you're making a lifetime decision." And I had no idea what that meant at the age of 17. Um, Not only from a teammate perspective, but then also too due to the success of the program. The greater Nashville community has really welcomed all of us with open arms, which I think has been a massive asset to us. But you still have to do the work, right? So I would say for those listening, you did as good of a job as any of my former teammates, at least from the outside, feeling like you shut the door and really opened up what could could be for you professionally. Um, Internally, how was that for you? Because I mean, I leaned on you a lot when I retired, to step into, the professional realm or kind of quote unquote normal life outside of athletics. How was that for you internally to step into that and be one of the first to do it kind of in our greater kind of teammate group?
Yeah, I think what I tried to do internally was I had all this energy, obviously, that had been geared pretty much my entire baseball career towards pursuing that dream of pitching in the big leagues. And in high school, it was okay, what's next? That MLB draft or going to college. And then in college, it's like, okay, what is next? Being a top prospect or winning a college World Series or getting drafted and all this stuff. And so I was always kind of looking forward for better or for worse. I always kind of knew like what the next hurdle was that I was going to jump over. And that weighs on you. I mean, it's a lot of stress. Sure, it's amazing to kind of be a prospect and feel like you're wanted and all this stuff, but it's also a whole lot of pressure on you as a young baseball player. And so when I was done playing, I think I knew that that energy needed to be directed somewhere. And for me, I directed it a couple different places. It was my career, and I think it was developing a new routine for my life and like kind of setting a foundation for what things were going to look like in the second career, the second opportunities to succeed. And so, Coach Corbin, the other coaches that we've had, like they've always preached, like, have a good routine, know what you're going to do every single day when you wake up in the morning. And I tried to carry that forward into business. I think that was kind of the first foundation that I had to set. It was like, okay, what's my routine going to be? And I've done that. And then it was just, okay, well, I promised these two guys that hired me, a 25-year-old kid who doesn't know anything about real estate, never had a job in his life in an office at least. They're not even an internship. And these guys, they took a chance on me. Bo and Tom are now business partners of mine and mentors. And I told them, I said, guys, I may not know anything, but I can promise you I'm going to work harder than anybody else. And I had to uphold my end of the bargain. And I think I did to the best of my ability. And just tried to go, tap into that network, find mentors, find people that supported the baseball program or Vanderbilt or whatever it may be. Just people who wanted to help a young guy trying to succeed. And Nashville's really good about that. The Vanderbilt network's certainly good about it, but Nashville itself is really good. Got some friends in a whole lot of other cities, and I think they would all tell you that every time they've come to Nashville, people are welcoming here. There's a really good business community that wants young people to succeed. So just try to tap into that. It's paid dividends for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think you've done it in spades without a doubt. It's not easy. And, I appreciate you sharing that piece of your story and all of it really. What I wanted people to again see is that again, you seemingly are, again, this pillar of success, but again, it hasn't been a linear progression to get there. And I think that's important for people to understand that, it's not necessarily that the equation to get somewhere is that difficult, but the actual hard work required can be. I think that's important. So as you sit here now, too, what's one thing that you know now as I don't know exactly how you're probably what, 31 now?
That's right.
Yeah, I know we're getting old. Um, what's one thing that you wish you knew at 21 coming out of Vanderbilt, stepping into professional baseball that you feel like would have helped you a lot?
I think and I kind of hit on it the last question, but always having a goal and always having kind of a next challenge ahead of you is a really great thing. And I think it's a good quality and the quality of someone who's successful is, kind of knowing what the next chapter is or the next step in their journey. But I also think there's a piece of that where if I would have sat there at 21 and taken a step back and said, hey, look, you're in a position that a whole lot of people would die to be in. Maybe you ought to just sit there and enjoy it for a moment. I think that would have been something that would have been great. Not that I didn't enjoy my time at Vanderbilt or in high school or even in professional baseball, but I was one that was, pretty type A and probably a little bit overly driven at times where it's like, I kind of could probably do with just sitting back and enjoying the moment. So I think that would be my advice to my 21-year-old self is look, you have an incredible opportunity. Just enjoy it for a little bit.
For sure. No, I think that's why I think it's easier. Another thing that's easier said than done. It's like, yeah, it's so the almost the greatest asset of driven people is almost in some ways their greatest detriment because yeah, you're always looking for something beyond where you are. And you're not able to sit there and relish the moment or smell the roses or however you want to say it. And sometimes looking back, especially you at times wish you would have. Um, so other than, again, setting goals, which I think again is hugely important. Um, for people listening today that, say, yeah, Kevin, I'd love to be as successful as you. Um, what advice would you give those people?
I think the best piece of advice I can give is to build out a group of mentors or leaders who can help guide you to where you want to go. And that can look a whole lot different for anybody. But for me, it was to put almost like a board of advisors in place. And I kind of started to do that when I was in pro ball, whether it's when you're playing baseball, it's your agent, it's your attorney, it's your wealth management person, your tax advisor. But as you kind of switch over into the real world, yes, those people are all really important too, but you also got to have folks who've done it before. For me, it was, some real estate investors who I had met who I thought had a really cool outlook on their approach to investing. It was some business leaders who were very active in the national community, who were also active in the Vanderbilt Alumni Network and also active in charitable organizations. Like, well, that's really cool that they've been so generous with their time, but also clearly very successful. How do I do that? And so I was able to kind of align myself with people like that. And I've stayed in touch with them and tried to just bounce ideas off them, whether it's a career question or a family question or whatever it may be, and just, going out and hit some balls at the driving range. I think it's just, you can have kind of an advisory board or mentorship group to help take you where you want to go. It sets you apart. And it's not something that those people don't just show up at your door. I mean, you need to seek them out. And I think people want to give back. They want to help young people, but it's hard to just expect them to just show up for you. You've got to go find them.
Yeah. I think that's so wise. One of the core tenets of this podcast is community matters and that we're better together. And that really speaks to that. I totally agree with you that, oftentimes I think we feel like we're capable of doing things alone and we might be to a degree, but we can almost always, and this is probably our team or at least my team mindset coming from teams my whole life, like I can achieve that much more with somebody else or with a team around me or with a mentor or with, somebody that has walked in my shoes longer or to a greater extent. I think I think it's huge.
No doubt. No doubt.
So awesome. Well, to wrap up, this is a little bit of a softer question, but another thing that I believe and that has been a big part of my story is that fear is the enemy. And I think there's two different types of fear, specifically fear that kind of drives you and to achieve, to go get things like that. But then there's also the negative fear um, that I think deters us from really achieving what we want to and really takes us off, takes our eye off the ball. Um, for Kevin Zomek sitting here right now, what's a fear that you deal with on a regular basis?
I think today I would tell you my greatest fear is that when I'm older and towards the end of my career, or maybe when I've retired, that I've sat back and said, "Wow, I did not take enough time to enjoy the moment, whether that's with my friends, my teammates, or most importantly, my family." And my wife and I have a 14-month-old daughter, and I think over the last 14 months, that has been something that's really hit home for me. Um, and my wife's done an incredible job of supporting me, not only in the transition out of baseball into the real estate world, but just in being a great wife and really kind of, she keeps the rails on over at the Ziomek household, keeps us on the rails. So um, she and I are very passionate about travel and finding ways to unplug, and so we try to make a concerted effort regularly to travel with our daughter and go see family, go see new places of the world that we haven't seen. And for me, that's probably the best way to combat that fear, because I know that I'm away from the office, I'm away from the house. Like I can't figure out some new task that I need to work on. I could just unplug, and that could be in the beach, it could be in the mountains, it could be anywhere. Um, I think that's my greatest fear, and I think we've got a plan to try to combat it, but there's always distractions that creep in and try to get in your way from doing so.
Absolutely. Unplugging is super important as part of our recharge process. And we end up better versions of ourselves when we do.
No doubt.
So last fun question as we wrap up, that I'm a finance guy. And so I have to sprinkle in a little bit of finance here at the very end of the podcast. When Kevin Zomek was a wee lad, what's the first thing that you remember saving for?
Saving for, I think it was a new baseball glove, an A2000, in Wilson A2000. That was always my favorite. A couple friends of mine had it, and I told my dad I absolutely had to have it. And
I love it.
I think, I don't know if I was 10 or 12 or what age I was, but he told me I was going to have to save if I was going to get it. And ended up getting one. And I think the A2000, the glove I wore all the way through pro ball. I was always a Wilson guy. So pretty cool to first real glove, and carried me all the way through pro ball.
That's a big savings like requirement to get an A2000 at that age. I remember getting an A2000 for Christmas one year when I was like 10 and I thought I had hit the lottery.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was the coolest thing ever. So anyway, well, Kev, hey, I really appreciate you being on the podcast today. I think it's been super helpful for our listeners to hear just kind of a little bit more of your story. So I appreciate you sharing. Well, everyone, thank you for listening. Remember, this is the Pursuit Podcast. And here at the Pursuit, remember, fear is the enemy. Real focus, hard work, and perseverance is what it takes to win. I'm your host, Grayson Garvin. Until next time.